The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine walkways of New Geneva Space Station as 12-year-old Tommy Chun hurried toward the education sector. His backpack bounced against his shoulders, filled with homework about ancient Earth civilizations that seemed so distant from his life among the stars. Tommy lived here with his parents while his father served as Earth's junior diplomatic aide to the Galactic Council. The space station buzzed with activity as beings from dozens of worlds conducted their daily business. Tommy had grown up seeing the towering, crystalline Zephyrians, the squat and methodical Corvin engineers, and the graceful floating ethereals. To him, this diversity was normal, beautiful even. He waved cheerfully at merchant cliques, a friendly Corvin who sold exotic fruits from the Outer Rim worlds. But not everyone shared Tommy's innocent view of interspecies harmony. Commander Vextar of the Hegemony War Fleet stood in the shadows of a maintenance corridor, his reptilian features twisted in disgust as he watched the human child interact so freely with what he considered inferior species. The Hegemony had joined the Galactic Council only recently, and their supremacist views were well known, but barely tolerated by the other member worlds. Vextar's yellow eyes followed Tommy's movements with predatory focus. Humans, he believed, were nothing more than upstart primitives who had stumbled into space travel through luck rather than worthiness. Their rapid expansion and easy acceptance by other species infuriated him. Today, he would send a message that would remind everyone of humanity's proper place in the cosmic order. As Tommy rounded a corner into a less crowded section of the station, Vextar made his move. The Hegemony commander activated a personal cloaking device and followed silently, his clawed feet making no sound on the metal flooring. 3 of his subordinates flanked him, their scaled faces hidden behind tactical masks. Tommy stopped at a viewing port, mesmerized as always by the swirling nebula visible in the distance. The colors shifted from deep purple to brilliant gold, and he pressed his small hand against the transparent aluminum, imagining what it would be like to fly through those cosmic clouds someday. Disgusting, Vextar hissed as he deactivated his cloak mere meters behind the boy, a primitive monkey touching what should be pristine. Tommy spun around, his heart hammering as he faced the towering alien warriors. Vextar stood nearly 8 feet tall, his muscular frame covered in dark green scales. His subordinates flanked him, weapons drawn, but not yet aimed. I'm sorry, Tommy stammered, pressing himself against the viewing port. Did I do something wrong? Vextar's lipless mouth curved into what might have been a smile on human, but on his reptilian features appeared purely menacing. Your entire species has done something wrong, little monkey. You exist where you should not. You breathe air that could sustain worthier beings. The boy's confusion was evident in his wide brown eyes. I don't understand. My dad says all species should work together. That's why we have a council. Your father, Vextar spat, is a fool who has poisoned weak minds with his talk of equality. There is no equality between the evolved and the primitive, between the worthy and the waste of space. Without warning, one of Vextar's subordinates struck Tommy with the butt of his energy rifle. The 12-year-old crumpled to the deck, blood streaming from his nose. Pain exploded through his skull as he tried to understand what was happening. This is what happens to those who forget their place, Vextar announced to his men, but his voice carried clearly through the corridor's communication system. He wanted others to hear. Record this. Let it serve as education for any who think the natural order can be ignored. The beating that followed was methodical and brutal. They avoided killing blows, instead focusing on causing maximum pain and humiliation. Tommy's cries echoed through the corridor as energy batons sent waves of agony through his small body. His school uniform tore under their claws, and bruises bloomed across his pale skin like dark flowers. Please, Tommy gasped between sobs. I didn't do anything. Please stop. Begging, Vextar noted with satisfaction. The sound of a species acknowledging its proper place. Your father should hear this. Let him know that his diplomatic games mean nothing when faced with true power. Security footage captured everything. The station's advanced monitoring system recorded not just the visual brutality, but the bio readings showing a human child's terror and pain. Every cry, every plea, every moment of suffering was preserved in digital memory. Other beings on the station heard the commotion, but none dared intervene. The hegemony's reputation for violence was well established, and their diplomatic immunity provided legal protection for their actions. A few ethereals drifted past quickly, their translucent forms shimmering with distress. Several Corvin merchants muttered among themselves, but continued walking, knowing they had families to protect. When Vextar finally called a halt to the assault, Tommy lay unconscious in a spreading pool of his own blood. His breathing was shallow and labored, and his left arm hung at an unnatural angle. The 12-year-old's face was so swollen and bruised that he was barely recognizable. "Clean this up," Vextar ordered his subordinates. "Leave the monkey where someone will find him, but make sure our message is clear. File a report claiming we witnessed the child attacking himself in some primitive human ritual. Diplomatic immunity will protect us from any consequences." As the hegemony warriors departed, emergency medical teams finally arrived. Dr. Sarah Kim, the station's chief medical officer, took one look at Tommy's condition and immediately called for emergency transport to the medical bay. Her hands shook as she stabilized his injuries, professional composure cracking at the sight of such senseless cruelty inflicted upon a child. Within hours, word of the attack spread throughout the station. Security footage, despite hegemony attempts to suppress it, found its way to multiple sources. The images of a human child being beaten by armored alien warriors sparked outrage among many species, but also fearful silence from others who recognized the message being sent. Ambassador Marcus Chun received the news while in session with the Galactic Council. His aide burst into the chamber, protocol forgotten in the urgency of the moment. Marcus listened with growing horror as details of his son's attack were whispered in his ear. The blood drained from his face as he realized that his 12-year-old boy was fighting for his life in the medical bay. The session continued around him, delegates discussing trade agreements and territorial disputes as if nothing had happened. But Marcus Chun was no longer listening. His mind was filled with images of his son's smile that morning at breakfast, the boy's excitement about presenting his history project, his innocent questions about alien cultures. That innocence had been shattered by creatures who saw his child as nothing more than a statement to be made. As medical teams worked to save Tommy's life, messages began flowing toward Earth through quantum communication networks. The attack on a human child by representatives of a Galactic Council member species would not go unanswered. But the response would come from an unexpected source. Earth's true diplomat was about to make himself known. Deep beneath the sprawling metropolis of Geneva, in levels that appeared on no public blueprints, Director James Morrison received the quantum transmission detailing his nephew's attack. The message arrived on his personal terminal, encrypted with codes that only a handful of humans possessed. As he read the clinical medical report describing 12-year-old Tommy's injuries, his weathered face remained perfectly calm, but his knuckles whitened as his grip tightened on the armrest of his chair. Morrison existed in the shadows that most of humanity never suspected. While Ambassador Marcus Chun served as Earth's visible representative to the galaxy, conducting trade negotiations and cultural exchanges, Morrison represented something far more ancient and primal. He spoke for the part of humanity that remembered when survival meant being the apex predator, when diplomacy was backed by the implicit threat of overwhelming violence. The office around him reflected this duality. Ancient Earth artifacts lined the walls alongside holographic displays showing the positions of ships and weapon systems that officially did not exist. A bronze sculpture of a Roman legionnaire stood next to quantum communication arrays that could reach the edge of known space in minutes. Books on philosophy and warfare filled shelves next to detailed psychological profiles of every species humanity had encountered. Morrison activated his secure communication array and spoke a single word into the quantum void, Protocol 7. Across Earth and throughout human space, dormant systems awakened. Ships that had been listed as decommissioned suddenly, powered up in hidden dry docks. Research facilities that appeared to study agricultural techniques revealed their true purpose as weapons laboratories. Colonies that seemed focused on mining and terraforming activated defensive systems that had been waiting decades for activation codes. The truth was that humanity had never really trusted their place among the stars. While one hand extended in friendship through diplomatic channels, The other had been preparing for the day when friendship proved insufficient. Morrison represented that second hand, and he had been building Earth's true capabilities for over 30 years. His first call went to Admiral Sarah Rodriguez, commander of the Sol Defense Fleet. Officially, humanity possessed a modest collection of patrol vessels and cargo ships. Unofficially, Rodriguez commanded a force that could challenge any known fleet in the galaxy. "Sarah," Morrison said when the Admiral's hologram materialized above his desk. "Have you seen the reports from New Geneva Station?" Rodriguez's expression darkened. "I've seen them. Tommy Chun, Marcus's boy. How bad is it, James?" "Fractured skull, internal bleeding, broken arm, severe trauma to multiple organ systems. He's alive, but barely. The medical reports suggest he'll carry the physical and psychological scars for the rest of his life." The Admiral's jaw tightened. "And diplomatically? The hegemony is claiming diplomatic immunity and suggesting the boy attacked himself in some human ritualistic behavior. They're calling it an internal cultural matter that the Galactic Council has no jurisdiction over. Bastards." Rodriguez's hand moved instinctively toward where her sidearm would be if this were not a holographic meeting. "What are your orders?" Morrison leaned back in his chair, his mind already calculating the moves ahead. "Begin Phase 1 of Operation Looking Glass. I want every ship we can spare moving toward hegemony space within the hour. Make it look like routine patrol adjustments and training exercises. Nothing that would trigger their threat assessment protocols." "Understood. What about Marcus? Does he know about our capabilities?" "Marcus knows his brother-in-law works in government consulting, and that's all he needs to know for now. He's a good man and an excellent diplomat, but he genuinely believes in peaceful resolution. That belief makes him effective in his role, but it also makes him unsuitable for what comes next." Morrison terminated the connection with Rodriguez and immediately opened another channel. This one connected him to Dr. Elizabeth Harper, director of the Prometheus Research Initiative. To the Galactic Council, Prometheus appeared to be humanity's primary research institution for peaceful applications of xenotechnology. In reality, it was the most advanced weapons development program in known space. "Liz," Morrison said when her angular face appeared on his screen. "How quickly can we deploy the Damocles system?" Dr. Harper's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're talking about full deployment? Against the hegemony homeworld? I'm talking about sending a message that even reptilian supremacists can understand. The system can be operational within 72 hours, but, James, if we reveal Damocles now, every species in the galaxy will know we've been developing weapons that violate at least 6 different interstellar treaties." "Let them know," Morrison replied coldly. "Let them all know that there are consequences for harming human children. Sometimes deterrence requires demonstration." Dr. Harper nodded grimly. "I'll begin preparations immediately. What about the other projects? Phoenix? Lazarus? The entire Olympus suite? Keep them in reserve for now. But I want everything ready for deployment if this escalates beyond the hegemony. Today proved that our peaceful approach has limits. It's time the galaxy learned about our other approaches." Morrison's next communication went to Captain Maria Santos, commander of the stealth reconnaissance vessel Invisible Sunday. Her ship was currently operating in hegemony space under deep cover, gathering intelligence on their military capabilities and political structure. "Captain Santos, I'm authorizing Operation Pandora's Box. Full intelligence gathering on hegemony military assets, political leadership, and civilian infrastructure. I want to know everything about their capabilities and vulnerabilities." "Copy that, Director. How deep do you want us to go?" "Deep enough to know exactly how to hurt them if they force our hand. But, Maria, I need psychological profiles on their leadership too. Find me someone in their command structure who understands consequences and can make rational decisions under pressure." "Already working on it. Director, there's something you should know. Our intercepts suggest the attack on Tommy Chun wasn't random violence. It was specifically ordered by their high command as a test of human resolve." Morrison felt a cold rage settle in his chest. "They want to see how we'd respond to the brutal assault of child." "That's correct. They believe humanity is weak because we prefer negotiation to violence. They think our diplomatic approach means we lack the will to fight. Then, They're about to receive a comprehensive education in their era. Morrison's voice carried a deadly quiet that Captain Santos recognized from their years of covert operations together. Continue your mission, but prepare for possible extraction if this situation deteriorates. Morrison's final call was to Tommy's father. Ambassador Marcus Chun appeared on screen looking haggard and exhausted. Behind him, the sterile walls of the medical bay were visible, along with machines monitoring his son's vital signs. "Marcus," Morrison said gently. "How is he?" "Stable, but barely. The doctors say he'll survive, but there might be permanent damage." "Brain trauma, James. They beat my 12-year-old son so badly he might never be the same." Morrison watched his brother-in-law struggle with emotions that no father should have to experience. Marcus was a good man who had dedicated his life to building bridges between species, fostering understanding and cooperation. That same goodness made him incapable of comprehending the kind of calculated cruelty that had been inflicted on his son. "Marcus, I need you to continue with your diplomatic duties. File formal complaints, demand investigations, follow all the proper channels. Make noise about this through official channels." "That's all I can do," Marcus replied bitterly. "The hegemony has diplomatic immunity. Even with security footage, the Council is calling this an internal matter. They're afraid of the hegemony's military power." "Let me worry about the hegemony's military power," Morrison said quietly. "You focus on being a father and a diplomat. Leave the rest to me." After ending the call, Morrison sat alone in his office for several minutes. Around him, the machinery of humanity's hidden strength continued its quiet work. Encrypted messages flowed through quantum networks, moving ships and personnel into position for what might become the first interstellar war humanity had ever fought. But this would not be the kind of war the galaxy expected. Humanity had learned much during their centuries among the stars, studying the tactics and strategies of every species they encountered. They had identified weaknesses in supposedly superior civilizations and developed weapons that exploited those weaknesses with surgical precision. Morrison activated his personal log and spoke into the recording device. "Today, the hegemony taught us that peaceful coexistence requires both parties to value peace. They have demonstrated their preference for violence over diplomacy, strength over justice, cruelty over compassion. In response, humanity will provide them with a comprehensive demonstration of why we chose diplomacy in the first place." He paused, thinking of Tommy Chun lying broken in a medical bay, surrounded by machines keeping him alive. "Not because we were weak," Morrison continued, "but because we were merciful. That mercy has now been exhausted." Admiral Sarah Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution as her hidden fleet emerged from the asteroid fields, where they had been concealed for over 2 decades. Around her, holographic displays showed the positions of 97 warships that the Galactic Council had never suspected existed. Each vessel represented technologies that humanity had developed in secret, combining the best innovations from every species they had encountered with improvements that were uniquely human. The Retribution itself was a masterpiece of hidden engineering. To external sensors, it appeared to be a standard heavy cruiser, the type of ship any species might build for system defense. But beneath its unremarkable exterior lay weapons systems that could crack planets and defensive shields that could withstand direct hits from stellar plasma cannons. Its quantum engines could accelerate the massive vessel to speeds that would make hegemony pursuit craft look like they were standing still. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "all fleet elements are reporting ready status. Stealth systems are optimal, and our quantum scramblers are preventing enemy sensors from detecting our true capabilities." Rodriguez nodded as she studied the tactical display showing hegemony space. Intelligence reports from Captain Santos painted a clear picture of their enemy's disposition. The hegemony maintained a powerful fleet, but one built around intimidation and overwhelming firepower rather than tactical flexibility. Their ships were larger and more heavily armed than anything humanity had revealed to the galaxy, but they were also predictable in their strategies. "Commence Operation Looking Glass," Rodriguez ordered. "All ships maintain stealth protocols until further notice. We're going to give them a demonstration they'll never forget." The first phase began with what appeared to be a simple navigation error. A human cargo vessel, the civilian ship Honest Trader, suddenly appeared in hegemony space after what seemed to be a hyperspace miscalculation. According to its distress signal, the ship was carrying agricultural supplies to a distant colony and had somehow ended up far off course. Commander Vextar, still basking in the glory of his attack on Tommy Chun, happened to be commanding the patrol squadron that intercepted the lost human vessel. His reptilian features showed contempt as he watched the primitive cargo ship drift helplessly through space, its engines apparently damaged by the navigation malfunction. Pathetic, Vextar hissed to his subordinates. Look how their technology fails them. No wonder they needed to attack themselves to gain sympathy from the Council. The hegemony commander ordered his 3 destroyers to surround the human ship and prepare boarding parties. According to interstellar law, they should have simply escorted the vessel to the nearest neutral port, but Vextar saw an opportunity to further demonstrate human weakness to his crew. "We will search their vessel thoroughly," he announced. "I suspect these primitive monkeys are engaged in espionage. Perhaps we will find evidence of their inferior technology attempting to spy on our glorious empire." What Vextar found instead was Captain James Murphy, a gray-haired human who had been commanding cargo vessels for 30 years. Murphy greeted the hegemony boarding party with nervous politeness, offering them access to his ship's manifest and apologizing profusely for the navigation error that had brought him into their territory. "Please, honored commanders," Murphy said, wringing his hands anxiously. "I'm just trying to deliver grain to the Kepler colony. My navigation computer malfunctioned during the jump. I mean no harm to your people." Vextar studied the human captain with predatory interest. Here was another opportunity to demonstrate the proper relationship between the hegemony and lesser species. He could beat this old man as he had beaten the child, showing his crew that humans were uniformly weak and deserving of contempt. "Search the ship," Vextar ordered his warriors. "Confiscate anything of value. This monkey will learn the cost of trespassing in civilized space." For the next hour, hegemony troops ransacked the cargo vessel while Captain Murphy watched helplessly. They destroyed equipment, contaminated food supplies, and terrorized the small human crew. Murphy's protests grew weaker as the abuse continued, and eventually he fell silent, staring at the deck in apparent defeat. But Captain Murphy was not a simple cargo hauler. He was a veteran of humanity's most elite special forces, and his ship was not what it appeared to be. Hidden beneath false bulkheads and concealed within innocent-looking cargo containers were weapons systems that could have destroyed Vextar's entire squadron in seconds. More importantly, Murphy's apparent helplessness was being broadcast on frequencies that the hegemony couldn't detect. Every moment of the abuse was being recorded and transmitted to Admiral Rodriguez's fleet, providing both legal justification for what would come next and precise tactical intelligence on hegemony boarding procedures. When the hegemony troops finally departed, leaving Murphy's ship damaged and drifting, Vextar felt satisfied that he had again demonstrated the natural order of the universe. Superior beings could do whatever they pleased to inferior ones, and the weak would accept their fate with the submission their station demanded. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Admiral Rodriguez watched the recording of the search with cold anger. The unnecessary destruction and casual cruelty reminded her too much of what had happened to Tommy Chun. These beings seemed incapable of exercising power without inflicting suffering, and that made them a threat not just to humanity, but to every peaceful species in the galaxy. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Decloak and assume battle formation. It's time for the hegemony to meet Earth's true diplomatic corps." 97 human warships materialized around Vextar's patrol squadron like ghosts becoming solid. Their appearance was so sudden and complete that the hegemony sensors registered the change as a massive system malfunction rather than the arrival of enemy vessels. For several crucial seconds, no one on the reptilian ships understood what they were seeing. The U.S. Retribution positioned itself directly in front of Vextar's flagship, its weapons systems powering up with the distinctive whine of charging plasma cannons. Around it, destroyers, cruisers, and dreadnoughts arranged themselves in perfect formation, their stealth systems finally disengaged to reveal the true scope of humanity's hidden strength. Hegemony vessels, Admiral Rodriguez broadcast on all frequencies. This is Admiral Sarah Rodriguez of the United Earth Defense Force. You are ordered to power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Vextar stared at the tactical display in shock. Where moments before there had been empty space, now dozens of human warships surrounded his squadron. His reptilian mind struggled to process how this was possible. Humans were primitives with inferior technology. They possessed only a handful of patrol craft and cargo vessels. Yet here was a fleet that rivaled anything the hegemony could deploy. Impossible, he hissed. Humans lack the industrial capacity to construct such a fleet. This must be some kind of illusion or deception. His tactical officer's voice shook as he reported what his sensors were detecting. Commander, these ships are not illusions. Our instruments show advanced weapon systems, quantum shielding, and engine configurations we don't recognize. Their technology appears to be significantly more advanced than our own. Vextar's yellow eyes narrowed as he studied the human fleet arrayed against him. Pride and supremacist ideology warred with tactical realism in his reptilian brain. He had built his career on the assumption that the hegemony possessed overwhelming military superiority over all other species. Now he was confronted with evidence that humans had been hiding capabilities that made his own forces look obsolete. Open fire, he commanded. These monkeys think they can intimidate us with their primitive toys. We will show them the power of true warriors. The 3 hegemony destroyers unleashed their full firepower against the human fleet. Plasma cannons that could melt through planetary crust struck the hulls of human vessels with devastating impact. Energy weapons that had conquered a dozen worlds focused their fury on targets that seemed impossibly outgunned. The human ships absorbed the assault without taking any apparent damage. Their shields flickered briefly as they dispersed the incoming energy, but held firm against weapons that should have reduced them to expanding clouds of superheated gas. Admiral Rodriguez watched the enemy fire dissipate harmlessly against her fleet's defenses and felt a grim satisfaction. Humanity had spent decades studying hegemony weapons technology through captured equipment and intelligence gathering. Every system the reptilians possessed had been analyzed, understood, and countered. Return fire, she ordered. Minimum power settings. We want them intact for questioning. The human response was precise and devastating. Instead of the massive energy discharges that characterized most space combat, the human weapons fired focus beams that struck specific systems on each hegemony vessel. Engines were disabled with surgical precision. Weapons systems were overloaded and shut down. Communication arrays were severed without affecting life support. In less than 30 seconds, Vextar's squadron was completely helpless, drifting in space with all offensive and defensive capabilities neutralized. The reptilian commander stared at his darkened control panels in disbelief. His ships had not been destroyed, which would have been a warrior's death he could understand. Instead, they had been dissected like laboratory specimens by beings he had considered inferior. Hegemony vessels. Admiral Rodriguez broadcast again. Your weapons have been disabled, and your engines are offline. Prepare to receive boarding parties. Any resistance will result in the complete destruction of your ships and crews. Captain Murphy's cargo vessel suddenly transformed as its false hull plates retracted to reveal a sleek assault ship bristling with weapons and deployment bays. Squads of human marines in advanced powered armor launched from its holds, moving toward the disabled hegemony vessels with the fluid precision of experienced soldiers. As Vextar watched the humans approach his flagship, he finally began to understand the magnitude of his error. These are not the weak primitives he had expected. These were apex predators who had been hiding their true nature behind a facade of peaceful diplomacy. And he had just given them every justification they needed to reveal themselves to the galaxy. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours of the reports from hegemony space. Representatives from 200 species filled the massive chamber, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, harmonic resonances, and electromagnetic pulses that the universal translators worked overtime to process. At the center of the circular chamber, the 3 captured hegemony destroyers hung in a holographic display, their hulls marked with precise weapon impacts that had disabled them without causing significant structural damage. Ambassador Marcus Chun stood at the human delegation's podium, but Today he was not alone. Beside him stood a man that most of the council had never seen before, though intelligence services throughout the galaxy had been trying to identify him for decades. Director James Morrison stepped forward, his presence immediately commanding attention despite his unremarkable appearance. Council Speaker Zentheri, a tall crystalline being whose species had mediated galactic disputes for millennia, activated the translation matrix. The Council recognizes the human delegation. Ambassador Chun, please explain the military action taken by your species against hegemony patrol vessels. Marcus Chun looked uncomfortable as he glanced at his brother-in-law. For 30 years, he had represented humanity through diplomatic channels, believing that peaceful negotiation could resolve any conflict. The revelation that Earth possessed a hidden military force capable of defeating the hegemony challenged everything he thought he knew about his own species. Morrison stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Honorable delegates, I am Director James Morrison of the United Earth Defense Force. I am here today not as a diplomat, but as the voice of humanity's final warning to those who would harm our children. A ripple of unease passed through the assembled delegates. The ethereal representative, a shimmering cloud of sentient gas, pulsed with concerned colors. The Corvin delegation clicked their mandibles nervously. Even a normally stoic Zephyrians seemed to lean forward with increased attention. Council Speaker Zentheri consulted his notes. Director Morrison, our records show no such position within the human governmental structure. Furthermore, the attack on hegemony vessels appears to violate numerous interstellar treaties regarding military engagement. Morrison's expression remained calm as he activated a holographic display showing the security footage from Tommy Chen's assault. The chamber fell silent as delegates watched a 12-year-old human child being systematically beaten by armored hegemony warriors. The boy's cries echoed through the translation matrix, creating sounds of distress that transcended species barriers. 12 years old, Morrison stated simply, a child whose only crime was existing while human in a galaxy that some believe belongs exclusively to reptilian supremacists. Commander Vextar and his subordinates recorded this assault for the purpose of intimidating our species. They have succeeded only in awakening something they should have left sleeping. The hegemony delegation, led by General Thakmore, rose from their positions. The massive reptilian general's scarred hide bore the markings of dozens of conquered worlds, and his yellow eyes burned with barely contained rage. The human speaks of crimes, Thakmore hissed through the translation matrix, but ignores their own aggression. Our patrol vessels were conducting legitimate security operations when they were ambushed by a hidden human fleet that violates every treaty governing military development. This council should be demanding explanations from the primitive monkeys, not listening to their pathetic justifications for violence. Morrison turned to face the hegemony general directly. General Thakmore, your forces have just provided the galaxy with a comprehensive demonstration of why humanity has been preparing for this day. Your species values strength above all else, correct? Strength is the only truth in the universe, Thakmore replied proudly. The weak exist to serve the strong, and the strong take what they require from the weak. This is natural law. Then, you should appreciate what comes next, Morrison said quietly, because you're about to discover exactly how weak you truly are. Morrison activated another holographic display, this one showing real-time images from the hegemony homeworld. High above the planet's atmosphere, barely visible to ground-based sensors, a series of objects hung in perfect geosynchronous orbit. They appear to be small asteroids, but spectral analysis revealed their true nature. The Damocles system, Morrison announced to the stunned council chamber. 47 kinetic bombardment platforms, each carrying tungsten projectiles with yields equivalent to strategic nuclear weapons. They have been in position around your homeworld for the past 6 hours, General. We could have deployed them at any time during the last 20 years, but chose not to because we believed in the possibility of peaceful coexistence. General Thakmore's scaled features shifted from rage to confusion to dawning horror as he realized the implications. The objects in orbit above his people could destroy any target on the planet's surface with pinpoint accuracy. Cities, military bases, government installations, All were now vulnerable to weapons that his people had never detected. Impossible d'accumuler. Our orbital defenses would have detected and destroyed any human vessels attempting to deploy weapons platforms. Your orbital defenses detected exactly what we wanted them to detect, Morrison replied calmly. Routine cargo shipments, scientific research vessels, diplomatic couriers, all carrying components that your sensors identified as harmless civilian equipment. We have been placing those components in position for 2 decades, waiting for the day when someone forced us to reveal our true capabilities. Council Speaker Zintheri's crystalline form flickered with agitation. Director Morrison, are you threatening to destroy the hegemony homeworld? I am informing the Council that humanity possesses the capability to do so, and that we developed this capability specifically in response to species like the hegemony who interpret peaceful intentions as weakness. But destruction of their homeworld would be wasteful and unnecessary. Morrison activated a third display, this one showing detailed schematics of hegemony military installations throughout their territory. The precision of the intelligence was staggering. Every ship, every weapon, every strategic resource was mapped and cataloged. We know the location and defensive capabilities of every military asset the hegemony possesses, Morrison continued. We know the names and psychological profiles of their commanders. We know which systems are critical to their infrastructure and which are redundant. We have spent 30 years preparing for the day when diplomacy would prove insufficient. He paused, allowing the implications to settle in the minds of every delegate present. Today, the hegemony leadership made a conscious decision to brutally assault a human child as a demonstration of their superiority over what they considered a weak species. They recorded this assault and broadcast it as a warning to anyone who might challenge their supremacist ideology. In response, humanity is making our own demonstration. Morrison gestured, and the holographic display changed to show real-time images from throughout hegemony space. Human fleets were appearing simultaneously around every major military installation, emerging from hiding places that should have been impossible to conceal such massive forces. Every hegemony military base, shipyard, weapons facility, and command center is now under human guns, Morrison announced. We have surrounded your entire military infrastructure with forces you never knew existed. Your patrol fleets have been disabled. Your defense platforms have been neutralized. Your command ships are currently receiving boarding parties. General Thakmore stared at the displays in shock. Decades of hegemony military supremacy were being dismantled in real time by beings he had considered primitive. His reptilian brain struggled to process the scope of the strategic deception that humans had maintained for an entire generation. This is impossible, he whispered. Our intelligence services monitor all human industrial activity. We know their capabilities. You know what we allowed you to know? Morrison replied. You monitored the capabilities we chose to reveal while remaining completely ignorant of our actual strength. Your intelligence services have been feeding you carefully crafted lies for 30 years. Morrison turned back to address the full council chamber. Honorable delegates, humanity hereby formally declares total war against the hegemony empire. This declaration is effective immediately and will remain in force until the following conditions are met. The chamber erupted in cacophony as representatives from dozens of species attempted to speak simultaneously. Council Speaker Zintheri activated emergency protocols to restore order, but the damage was done. For the first time in galactic history, a member species had declared total war against another member in the council chamber itself. First, Morrison continued once relative quiet returned. All hegemony military forces will surrender unconditionally to human commanders. Second, General Thakmore and Commander Vextar will be delivered to human custody to stand trial for crimes against humanity. Third, the hegemony government will formally acknowledge the sovereignty and equality of all species recognized by this council. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled delegates. Fourth, and most importantly, the hegemony will establish a fund for the medical and educational needs of every child who has suffered under their supremacist policies. They will learn to value the young of all species, or they will discover what happens when humanity stops pretending to be civilized. General Thakmor rose to his feet, his massive form shaking with rage. The hegemony will never bow to demands from inferior beings. We are warriors. We will fight to the death rather than submit to monkey overlords. Morrison nodded approvingly. Excellent. I was hoping you would choose the difficult path. It will make the lesson much clearer for anyone else who might consider harming human children in the future. He activated his personal communication device, speaking a single word into the quantum void. Execute. Throughout hegemony space, human weapons opened fire simultaneously. The assault was precise, devastating, and completely overwhelming. Military installations that had stood for centuries disappeared in brief flashes of plasma fire. Shipyards that had built the instruments of conquest were reduced to expanding clouds of superheated metal. Command centers that had coordinated the subjugation of dozens of worlds went silent as their communication arrays were severed with surgical precision. But notably absent from the destruction were civilian targets. Hospitals, schools, residential areas, and cultural sites remained untouched. The human assault focused exclusively on military assets, demonstrating a level of precision and restraint that shocked both enemies and allies. In less than 6 hours, the mighty hegemony war machine that had terrorized the galaxy for generations simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed in glorious battle, but methodically dismantled by beings they had considered beneath notice. Director Morrison watched the tactical displays showing the systematic neutralization of hegemony military power and felt no satisfaction. This had been necessary, but it marked the end of humanity's innocence among the stars. They could no longer pretend to be simple explorers seeking friendship among the cosmos. The demonstration is complete, Morrison announced to the council chamber. The hegemony military no longer exists as a functional force. Their leaders have 72 hours to meet our conditions or face the consequences of continued resistance. He turned to leave, then paused at the chamber entrance. Let this serve as notice to all species represented here. Humanity chose diplomacy not because we were weak, but because we were strong enough to be merciful. That mercy has limits, and those limits are defined by the safety of our children. Test those limits at your own peril. 6 months after what Galactic historians would later call the human revelation, Tommy Chun sat in the observation deck of New Geneva Station, watching the same nebula that had fascinated him on the day his life changed forever. His left arm was still weak from the injuries, and the scars on his face would never completely fade, but his eyes held a brightness that spoke of healing and hope. Beside him sat General Thakmor, though the former hegemony leader now wore simple civilian clothing rather than military regalia. The massive reptilian had undergone what human psychologists termed a comprehensive re-education process during his 6 months in human custody, learning concepts that his supremacist upbringing had never allowed him to consider. You understand now, Tommy said quietly, his 12-year-old voice carrying a wisdom that should have been beyond his years, why my uncle did what he did. Thakmor's yellow eyes, once filled with predatory hatred, now showed something resembling regret. I begin to comprehend the error of our ways, young one. We believed that strength meant the ability to inflict suffering on the weak. Your people showed us that true strength lies in the ability to protect the innocent while showing mercy to enemies. The transformation of the hegemony had been swift and complete. Faced with the total destruction of their military capabilities and the overwhelming evidence of human technological superiority, the reptilian government had capitulated within the 72-hour deadline. But rather than imposing harsh occupation or demanding tribute, humanity had surprised the galaxy once again with their response. Director Morrison had personally overseen the reconstruction of hegemony society, but instead of replacing their government with human administrators, he had established educational programs designed to teach former supremacists about cooperation and equality. Hegemony citizens were required to spend time living among other species, learning firsthand that the beings they had considered inferior possessed intelligence, creativity, and dignity equal to their own. The process had not been without difficulties. Thousands of hegemony citizens had initially resisted the new order, clinging to their supremacist beliefs even in the face of defeat. But as time passed, and They witnessed the benefits of cooperation over domination. Resistance gradually gave way to acceptance, and eventually to understanding. General Thakmore himself had been assigned to work directly with victims of hegemony aggression as part of his rehabilitation. He spent his days helping to rebuild worlds his forces had conquered, caring for children his soldiers had orphaned, and learning to see the universe through the eyes of those he had once oppressed. "Tommy," Thakmore said carefully, using the human custom of addressing children by their preferred names rather than formal titles. "May I ask you something?" The boy nodded, his attention still focused on the swirling colors of the distant nebula. "When your uncle revealed humanity's true capabilities, why did he not simply destroy us? Your people possessed the power to eliminate the hegemony entirely. Why show mercy to those who had shown you none?" Tommy considered the question seriously before answering. "Uncle James says that true strength isn't about hurting people who can't fight back. It's about being strong enough to help them become better instead. If he had just destroyed you, other species might have learned to fear us, but they wouldn't have learned to respect us." The wisdom in those words struck Thakmore with surprising force. Throughout his military career, he had equated respect with fear, assuming that beings submitted to the hegemony because they admired their strength. Now he understood that fear bred only resentment and eventual rebellion, while genuine respect created lasting bonds. "Your uncle is wise beyond his years," Thakmore observed. "But surely some among your people wanted revenge for what was done to you?" Tommy touched the scars on his face unconsciously. "Some did. Admiral Rodriguez wanted to turn your homeworld into a crater. Captain Santos suggested broadcasting your defeat across the galaxy as a warning to other bullies. But Uncle James said that revenge just creates more enemies. Justice, on the other hand, creates friends." Across the station, in the diplomatic quarter that had once seemed so peaceful to a young boy, Ambassador Marcus Chun was concluding negotiations for the most comprehensive interspecies cooperation treaty in galactic history. The revelation of humanity's hidden capabilities had fundamentally shifted the balance of power, but rather than using that advantage to dominate others, Earth had proposed a new model of interstellar relations. The Treaty of New Geneva established humanitarian protection protocols that extended to all member species. Any attack on civilian populations, particularly children, would trigger immediate intervention by what was now being called the Human Peacekeeping Force. But the treaty also included provisions for technological sharing, educational exchange, and mutual defense that benefited all signatories. Most remarkably, the treaty included former hegemony worlds as equal partners rather than conquered territories. Species that had spent generations under reptilian oppression were now free to develop their own governments and cultures, protected by human military might, but not controlled by human administrators. Director Morrison had quietly returned to the shadows from which he had emerged, his moment of revelation complete. The galaxy now knew that humanity possessed overwhelming military superiority, but they also knew that this strength would be used to protect rather than conquer. The balance was delicate but effective. Fear of human capabilities deterred aggression, while admiration for human restraint encouraged cooperation. In the medical bay, where Tommy had fought for his life, Dr. Sarah Kim was treating her last hegemony patient. The reptilian child had been injured in the collapse of a military installation during humanity's swift assault, and her parents had initially refused treatment from a primitive monkey doctor. But as Dr. Kim worked tirelessly to save their daughter's life, asking nothing in return, their prejudices began to crumble. "Dr. Kim," the child's father said hesitantly, "my daughter asks if you have children of your own." Dr. Kim smiled as she adjusted the young reptilian's life support systems. "I have a son about her age. He's back on Earth, but he sent me pictures of his school projects. Would she like to see them?" The hegemony father nodded, and Dr. Kim activated her personal hologram display. Images of human and alien children working together on various projects filled the air around the medical bed. The young reptilian's eyes widened as she saw beings from dozens of species collaborating on art, science, and exploration. "They look happy," the child whispered in her native language. "They are happy," Dr. Kim replied through the translation matrix. "When different kinds of people work together, they can accomplish amazing things." You people are going to learn that too. Throughout the former hegemony territory, similar scenes were playing out on hundreds of worlds. Human peacekeepers worked alongside former enemies to establish new governments based on cooperation rather than domination. Educational programs taught young reptilians about art, science, and philosophy from across the galaxy. Trade networks that had once focused on extracting tribute from conquered worlds were rebuilt to benefit all participants. The transformation was not without challenges. Some hegemony citizens remained committed to their supremacist ideology and had to be isolated for the safety of others. A few isolated military units attempted guerrilla resistance, though they were quickly neutralized by human forces. But for the vast majority of former subjects and citizens of the hegemony, the new order represented freedom from a system that had oppressed them for generations. Back in the observation deck, Tommy Chun was showing General Thakmore images from his personal tablet, pictures of the art project he had been working on before the attack. The drawings depicted various alien species working together to build something beautiful, a space station where beings from across the galaxy could meet in peace. "This is what I want to be when I grow up," Tommy explained, pointing to a small human figure in the drawing standing beside much larger aliens. "I want to help build places where everyone can be friends, no matter what they look like or where they come from." Thakmore studied the drawing carefully, noting the attention to detail and the obvious care the boy had put into representing each species accurately and respectfully. "You have great talent, young artist. But why do you show yourself so small beside the others?" Tommy grinned, the expression transforming his scarred features. "Because being big doesn't make you important. Being kind does. Uncle James taught me that the strongest person in any room is usually the one who doesn't need to prove how strong they are." As if summoned by his nephew's words, Director Morrison appeared in the observation deck doorway. His presence was as understated as ever, but both Tommy and Thakmore immediately sensed the quiet authority he carried. "Tommy," Morrison said gently, "your father is looking for you. The council session is ending, and he wants to take you to dinner." The boy jumped up excitedly, then paused to address the former hegemony general. "Thank you for listening to my drawings, General Thakmore. Will you be joining us for dinner? Dad always says food tastes better when you share it with friends." Thakmore's reptilian features showed surprise at the invitation. 6 months ago, he would have considered the idea of dining with inferior beings to be beneath his dignity. Now, the simple kindness in the boy's invitation touched something in his transformed consciousness that he was still learning to understand. "I would be honored, young Tommy," Thakmore replied formally, "if your father does not object to dining with a former enemy." "You're not an enemy anymore," Tommy said with a matter-of-fact certainty that only children possess. "Uncle James says enemies are just friends who haven't figured out how to be friends yet." As Tommy ran off to find his father, Morrison and Thakmore stood alone in the observation deck. The nebula outside continued its slow cosmic dance, indifferent to the small dramas of biological beings, but somehow the colors seemed brighter to both men. "Director Morrison," Thakmore said carefully, "may I ask what humanity plans to do with its revealed capabilities? Will Earth now assume the role of galactic hegemon that my people once claimed?" Morrison considered the question while watching his nephew disappear around a corner, the boy's laughter echoing through the corridor. "General, we've spent centuries learning that the greatest empires in human history eventually fell because they confused strength with the right to dominate others. We have no interest in ruling the galaxy." He turned to face the former enemy directly. "What we will do is ensure that no child of any species ever again suffers what Tommy endured. We will protect those who cannot protect themselves, and we will teach those who would harm others that there are consequences for cruelty. And if some species reject your protection, if they prefer their own strength to humanity's mercy." Morrison's expression remained calm, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Then they will discover why we spent 30 years preparing for this conversation instead of 30 years looking for it. Mercy is a choice, General. We will continue to offer it as long as it is respected." As the two men left the observation deck together, neither noticed the small figure watching from maintenance corridor. Captain Maria Santos, still officially commanding a reconnaissance vessel, smiled as she observed the former enemies walking side by side toward the diplomatic quarter. Her mission had evolved far beyond gathering intelligence on potential threats. Now she and her crew worked to identify species and civilizations that might benefit from the human model of cooperative strength. The galaxy was vast, and there were countless worlds where children lived under the rule of those who confused power with the right to inflict suffering. Humanity had revealed its true nature to the cosmos, and that nature was not the passive diplomacy that had fooled enemies for decades. It was something far more dangerous to tyrants, and far more hopeful for the oppressed. The promise that strength and kindness were not opposites, but two aspects of the same fundamental truth. In the years that followed, that truth would spread across the galaxy like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Species that had never known protection would learn what it meant to be safe. Civilizations built on oppression would discover the benefits of cooperation. And children throughout the cosmos would grow up in a universe where beings like Director Morrison stood quietly in the shadows, ensuring that mercy remained a choice rather than a weakness. The age of humanity's hidden strength was over. The age of humanity's revealed purpose had begun.